G'day legends, I hope you're all amazing. On today's video, we are checking out a rack unit that I have been wanting to try forever. And I have to thank the patron saint of this channel, Mr. Brian Hook, for sending out this Ensoniq DP4 for me to try. A little bit of a backstory. About 18 months ago now, when I was well entrenched into my rack phase, which I am still in, I still love making videos about this stuff, I bought a DP4 in Australia on eBay. And it arrived in an absolutely shocking state. It powered up, but it wasn't passing audio. I opened up the unit to have a look at it, and it's kind of like the worst constructed piece of rack gear I've ever seen in my life. Having this DP4 here does not change my mind about that. There were some very interesting construction decisions made in it, but I ended up returning that unit. The seller was super cool about it, and they said, look, I'm really sorry. It obviously got damaged in transit. These things happen. I know if you've been buying and selling old rack gear like this for a while, you've run into a few situations like that. I've had that happen to me as well. I know the feeling. It happens. It's old, crusty stuff that we want to check out for many reasons, mostly fueled by nostalgia. But the DP4 has remained this elusive unicorn. Well, this one's in very good condition. Again, thank you, Brian, for sending this one out. And it's pretty unique. Essentially, you can run 4 separate effects in one of a variety of ways. You can run all 4 effects at the same time using either mono or stereo ins and stereo outs. You can use all 4 effects separately, so you can have 4 mono chains, and then you've got a bunch of different combinations. You can use it as 2 separate stereo effect processors, and if you wanted 2 effects on one chain, 2 effects on the other, you can do that. You've got individual input and output levels for the inputs and outputs on the back. You've got a bunch of kind of little push button controls over here. This is deep into the VCR era of rack units on here. You know what I mean, like the Korg A3, the DP4, everything that was coming out in the early to mid 90s just looked like a VCR or a hi-fi. Looking at this reminds me of my dad's old massive hi-fi setup that he had as a kid, which probably got me into loud rock music in the first place. So basically, in this video, I'm going to try a bunch of presets. I'm going to do a bunch of tweaking. I'm focusing on guitar tones here, but the use case for this was in a studio. So you could run 4 separate effects on your mix kind of at any time, and there was so much flexibility. You didn't need separate rack units. You could do most of what you needed to do with the DP4, and there's things like EQs, there's filters, there's reverbs, there's modulation effects, there are pitch effects, and there's a bunch of really interesting sounding presets. There are also presets that are curated for the different I/O scenarios. So I'm just going to be going through the presets where I plug a mono guitar signal out and I get a stereo output over here. But of course, I guess you could do 4 cable method with this thing if you really wanted to in a stereo rig. So definitely ahead of the times. It's a unit that I think a lot of guitar players probably aren't aware of, but if you're a producer or somebody who plays around with synth units, you're probably very familiar with Ensoniq and the DP4. There's also the DP4 Plus and the DP2, and I think a few other units out there, but they are interesting entries in the Hall of Fame of rack units. Let's dive in. Let's get very, very greasy. Let's start out with some of the guitar-oriented presets on here. I'll go through a few of those, I'll tweak them, and then we might try and bake something from scratch. The configuration that I'm going to be using across this video is just a simple mono in, and then I'm going to be using the main stereo output so I can use all 4 effects in here. Like I said in the intro, to me, this does strike me as something that would have been really useful in a studio while you're mixing. If you want 4 separate inputs with 4 separate mono effects, or you want separate stereo in and out effects processors, this is going to do that really well. But from my perspective, I want to know how it sounds on guitar, and I found this LA Studio guitar preset. So let's just hear the compressor in there, then I'll add various layers of grease. Now that's just my guitar DI'd into the DP4. You can hear that little bit of compression. Let's take a look at what's going on with the other effects, because if I hit edit over here, I can get into each of the individual effect blocks. For example, there is a dual delay over here, and I can scroll through the parameters with these left and right keys over here. So mix at 31, volume at 99. I can set up the left input delay. I've got regeneration and panning available for that delay. You can see it's like 400 milliseconds on one side, 800 on the other in there. And you can come through and even set up cross feedback on there. So I'll revisit that for one of my favorite kind of halo style delays a little bit later. We've got damping in there, and you can even set up modulation sources. I imagine because Ensoniq made keyboards, it makes a lot of sense that if you had a MIDI capable keyboard, you could integrate it with this and use the keyboard as a set of controllers for the effects in here, which would have been really, really powerful. So that's the dual delay at the end of the chain. On the C block, we've got a pitch shifter, and this one is doing probably a little bit of stereo detune. You can see, yeah, up 10 and down 6. I'll go in and tweak that in a second. And we've got this 8-voice chorus over here, which is sounding pretty lush. Let's start by tweaking this one over here. So you can see the rate's at 28 and the width is at 18. I'm going to bring the rate down a little bit on that one. I do like a subtle chorus, and we'll compensate by bringing the width up a little bit over there. What else can we tweak? We've got the stereo spread. We've got regeneration, which I'm going to take all the way down to 0. I guess technically a chorus with regeneration is a flanger, but that might just be a semantic exercise over here. So using the big value wheel, what have we got over here? We've got the regeneration time as well, which is interesting over there. Alrighty, let's just start off having a listen to what this chorus sounds like. If I want to bypass blocks, I kind of double click them over here. So this is just going to be the comp and the chorus. If you want lush 80s grease, this thing is delivering it in spades. I really like that chorus on there. Let's go into the pitch shifting section over here. I'm just going to set up a classic Eventide style micro pitch over here. So let's come back so we can tweak voice 1 over there. Let's make that one, instead of being 10 cents up, we'll make it 9 cents up. And we'll come over to voice 2 and we'll make that one 9 cents down. I can come back over here and tweak a few extra parameters like the overall volume and the mix. Maybe let's go for slightly less mix on there, and I'll come right to the end and you'll see that you can actually modulate this, which is kind of cool if you want a little bit of sort of instability in there. But you've got a quality setting, so you've got long and smoother and short and coarser over here. Let's hear the difference between that with the chorus and the delay bypassed on here. What have I done? I think I've bypassed everything. It's not what I want. We want the compressor bypassed, we want the delay bypassed, and we want the chorus bypassed over here. That's pretty good. That's making everything sound wider and thicker rather than washed out. Let's go to the delay section now. So I'm going to bypass this one over here. I don't want to play with the mod source, but what I want to do here is maybe let's take a 400 millisecond delay and pair it with a 300 millisecond delay. So I'm going to come over here and take this particular delay time all the way down. So 300 milliseconds exactly over there. Let's take a look at the overall regeneration on there. No regeneration, but I think we have cross feedback, which is cool on there. So let's hear it without the cross feedback on there, and then I'll gradually bring it in. I should probably bypass the rest of the grease just for now so we can listen to the delays. I'll play around with the damping on here. I'm going to assume this is probably a low pass filter on the regeneration, but we'll hear what it sounds like at 0 and then at around 50. Tweaking this preset, let's have a listen to some of the reverb options on here. It is pretty awesome that you can run reverb, chorus, pitch, and delay on a single preset. Kind of just speaks to the fact that this stuff developed pretty quickly from the mid-80s, where you had units like the SPX90, which were multiple effects units, but they could run one effect at a time, to the mid-90s, where you've got units where you can run 4 high-quality effects at the same time, or you can run them in parallel, or you can run them as 4 mono effects on 4 mono sources. So let's just start out with the small room reverb. I'm just going to flick through a couple of different options until I hear one I really like. Back to the clean sound. reverbs on here are super solid. They do remind me of the Yamaha style reverbs more than something like a Lexicon or an Eventide. They just kind of work. They're not particularly lush or super modulated at the stock settings, but they are solid, and a lot of the time that's all you want. The delays, the pitch, and the chorus, as we heard earlier, are very good, but I think the effect that surprised me the most is the phaser. It might be the best digital phaser that I've heard in one of these old rack units. So I've got this preset up here at the moment. I'll just play. I might tweak it, I might not. Then I'll run through a few other wacky sounding presets in here just to give you an idea of the kind of creative sound design capabilities that the DP4 has. But for now, the phaser. Now, the all-important patch on any effects processor from this era is what I like to call the Savage Garden patch. It's normally some kind of stepped phaser or stepped flanger, but it gives you this kind of effect. In addition to the effects that I've been showcasing here, you have the usual selection of compressors, filters, EQs, DSs, and gates and expanders, kind of standard studio stuff that nowadays we just use plugins for, but this is from the era where you didn't just have a plugin for everything. In fact, most people weren't recording on computers at the time, and if you needed an effect, you needed a box to do that effect. So having a dedicated unit that could do 4 effects at the same time would have been a game changer for a lot of people. Now, this does have guitar amp and speaker simulation in here. I'm a little bit terrified to try it, but I'm just going to bite my lip and let you hear this preset. It's called Rockin' Lead Guitar. How bad could it be? Famous last words. Famous last words indeed. That very much reminds me of my old Zoom 707 processor. Just the texture in that amp and the speaker sim on there. You know, it might be cool for a character tone, but boy, we've come a long way when it comes to amp simulations. I'm going to bypass the speaker sim in here and load up an IR in my Axe effects. Let's see if this sounds any better. This is my free IR. Check the video description if you want it. But yeah, this is the amp sim. Maybe I'll turn the pitch and the delay off for now so we can just hear that with a semi-decent IR. I mean, it's less bad. The controls in there are pretty baffling in there. So you've got gain change, expand ratio, pre-EQ, FC. I'm going to guess that's probably some kind of filter frequency. So 724 Hertz I change it to in there. There's probably also a high pass in here. There's a noise gate, gate release time, speaker high pass. You know, they tried, and I'm sure, again, at the time, if you were somebody, say, producing a 90s dance track, and you had a DI guitar sound or a guitar sound that maybe didn't fit, and you were like, you know what? This guitar just needs something on it. I'm going to dial up one of these guitar presets, put it low in the mix, and it will be totally fine for someone who's just popped a bunch of ecstasy and wants to dance the night away. However, for someone who has not popped a bunch of ecstasy, has had too many coffees today, and is living in 2024 with things like the Axe effects, it's kind of amusing, isn't it? You know, yeah, that's close enough to guitar. Whereas nowadays we absolutely sweat the details in like, oh, I looked under the hood in the Fractal, and where they have the cathode follower compression value, it's off by 2%. This must be fixed or I can't make music. to pull up stumps right there. This is usually the part of the video on a unit that I've really enjoyed where I tell you that I've spent so much time, but I feel like I've barely scratched the surface. That is definitely true for the DP4. The more I play it, the more I enjoy it. It does all of my favorite things. There's really nice stereo pitch detune. There's multi-voice chorus. You can do some lovely multi-tap and dual delays. There are some very serviceable reverbs on there, probably more useful on drums and vocals than they are on guitars, but I'm a guitar player, so I think they sound totally fine on guitar anyway. And then you've got some really interesting effects in there. I don't think the pitched stuff is quite up to the standard of something like an Eventide. I have seen this mentioned as like the working class Eventide. I think that actually undersells what this can do, because being able to run 4 separate parallel chains or 4 stereo effects at once, again, for the context of the era, would have been a game changer for so many people. The fact that they at least tried to put some guitar and speaker simulations in there, you know, now they kind of sound nostalgic. They remind me of being a kid learning guitar. They're not the first thing I would reach for if I wanted an inspiring guitar tone, but again, they're like a little throwback to that particular era. The thing that impressed me the most about this, again, it's like the phaser, the flanger in there, some of those stepped effects, which if you think about this outside of the little guitar world that we live in, you imagine you're producing dance music or pop in the 90s and you want some fresh sounding effect. Those kind of stepped filters and phasers and flanges were very popular at the time, and these units could deliver them. There's also some really fun stuff like tape stop effects and things like that. Again, there's probably free plugins you can get now that just do all those kind of sounds, and there's sampling, which is so much more common. But at the time, I can see why people enjoyed this unit so much. If you're on the lookout for something to put in your guitar rack that's not an overpriced Lexicon or Eventide, and I say overpriced and I mean it because as guitar players, we have begun to fetishize this stuff the way people fetishize old fuzz pedals and overdrives. It's like, oh, did Lukather use it? Did Dan Huff use it? Well, I need to pay over no matter what. I mean, a TC2290, an H3000, a PCM70, they're great units, but they're not the only great units out there. I think if you expand your search and you look for some other things, the DP4 is well worth checking out. Send patron saint of the channel, Mr. Brian Hook, some love for sending this one out. Have a great day. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.